Very good morning to all of you. The title of my presentation is Care of the Dying. To talk about care of the dying, I would like to again, I'm sure many of you are saying this case scenario. I'm going to repeat this again and again because each aspect of what we are discussing, I would like to relate to the same patient, a similar patient, which we have discussed in many of the previous sessions. Again, here we have a 68-year-old gentleman with advanced cancer lung. He was brought to the hospital with history of severe breathlessness. The physician decided to shift him to ICU. Because he was extremely restless, they had physically restrained him. As arterial saturation was falling, the resident put him on artificial ventilation. 2 days later, he died. What do you think his end-of-life care was? How was his end-of-life care? He's an elderly patient, very advanced cancer lung. He was brought to the hospital. He went to the ICU. He died there. How good was his end-of-life care? Obviously, his symptoms were not very well controlled. He came with breathlessness, delirium. Tying a patient is not a very good way of managing a symptom with delirium. But about his death, he died alone, away from his family members, totally surrounded by strangers, no proper goodbye to his family, no adequate preparation, and with all the tubes going down his nose, throat, bladder, lot of IV lines, with all the tubings all around, not a very dignified way to die. Was it really indicated to have a mechanical ventilation for this kind of advanced cancer patient? What about his psychosocial and spiritual support? While he's dying, were those kind of things addressed? How was his family supported? The family waiting outside, or anxiously waiting, not knowing what's happening to their parent, the father inside. So these are the issues which we often see in our hospital setup, and we sometimes, most of the time, in our very busy schedule, we don't even think about it. Just want to take you to what happens in ICU. These are few studies which I'm quoting based on some Western literature, and I'm sure things are very similar even in India. Most of the ICU intensive care setup what we see in India, they say that how symptoms are so badly managed in ICU. We think when we shift the patient to ICU, things are fixed, everything is sorted. No, we know that even in ICU setup, the symptoms are very badly managed. Like this one study shows that how 55 to 75% of ICU patients with cancer experience pain, confusion, anxiety, sleep disorders, unsatisfied hunger or thirst. 20% of patients in medical ICU did not receive treatment for pain or dyspnea. Patients were confused, restraints were used more often than managing some otherwise, which is recommended. So restraints are one of the most undignified way to manage a patient who is confused or delirious. Conflict. Often we see a lot of patients, we keep hearing the news about how patient died in the hospital, family became angry. Why? Because families hear very different viewpoint from physicians, or no communication at all, or different physicians telling you different things, or told in a way that they don't understand, leading to a lot of confusion, anger, hostility, and frustration. And it is not a phenomenon happening in India. The world over this happens. And that leads to a lot of this kind of conflict happening between the health professionals and the families. How are people dying in India? Because it's all about, we're discussing today, end-of-life care. Let's see how people are dying in India. Let's introspect about what's happening in India. India is a country where only till the recent times, death was considered as a natural part of life as birth. It was expected, accepted, and filled with rituals. It was very normal Like if you see our old scriptures, we talk about phases of life as a young age, then grihasthashram, and then finally people go to the forest when they give up on everything and they go to forest knowing that now they're going to die. It was a very normal part of a life cycle. There were no surprises, no denial, no panic. And when the patient came, the time came, the patients were kept clean and comfortable, surrounded by their loved one until they drew their last breath. This was quite normal. It was part of our life. But soon, what is happening today, dying in India today? There's one interesting study, not many studies though, about end of life care in India. On one study which I saw done by one of my colleagues in Pune, she looked at what is the place, what is the study? They looked at the study on healthy lay people, asking them about their preferred place of death. Where do they want to die? This is one question they asked the people in the community, healthy people. And most of them, majority, the study found that majority prefer to die at home. This is an Indian study. But what is happening in India? Majority of people, they're dying in ICU. Whenever it's any critical end of life care, they're shifted to ICU and they're connected to machines and they die there. If they can't afford it, they're discharged, so-called LAMA, against medical advice, and they die on the way home, or die trying to find a place where they can take such patient. In that whole list, flurry of event, they die on the way home or on the way. Bad way to die. I want to quote something which came related to some very good article saying goodbye with dignity, which came in The Hindu, 2016. In India, the poor die in agony in neglect, the middle class die in agony in ignorance, and the rich die in agony on a ventilator. No one gets dignified and pain-free death. It's a classic example. How do our most VIPs, they die? Many times they're dead, but they're still kept on ventilator till many other things are sorted out, especially if a politician dies. The political party, they don't declare death, and the poor politician is on ventilator for days together, even though he would have died long time back. Same thing happens with celebrities. So either way, whether poor or rich, how the death is being dealt in our country is not so good. And often we die the most undignified and painful death. And it applies to you and me also. Today we are at this, what we call it as death-defying culture, extending life at any cost. We have the slogans, beat death, cheat death, conquer cancer. And these kind of slogans often shape our expectation, because we say that the community also expects us to do that. And when we can't save the patient, the society gets very angry with us. Again, as quoted by somebody, medicalization of death. Society has thrust the messy and insoluble aspect of life, the old age and death, onto medical professionals. They are asking us to deal with this old age and death. A good death is something that doctors should be able to prescribe. It's as if it's a prescription that we should be able to give. Hospitals are criticized for failing to care properly for dying, as if it is a condition that can be treated. And somewhere, we as a healthcare professionals have also started believing that they can advise or control how to die. And which is not true. Death is a very natural process, it's nature, and we cannot be fighting with that. And when we do that, often that leads to what we call it as a most miserable way of dying. Most of us, when we study our MBBS, we don't discuss about these things. And suddenly one fine day, we become the interns, and we are asked to go to emergency. And when the patient dies there, we are asked to declare death. We don't even know how to recognize death. We are not taught how the death looks like, how to recognize death. And when the death happens, how to declare death. What are the signs and symptoms of death? How to declare. We just learn something up from our seniors, and suddenly we are thrown to the society to deal with death and dying. Even in the US, the study shows that all US medical schools, the average total instruction on death and dying for would-be doctors mere 17 hours in 4-year curriculum. So that is what is the reality. And that's the reason we do such a shabby job with death and dying. So what does a good death means? Can death be good? Can there be something called good death? What patient thinks about good death? If you ask a patient, or it can be one of us tomorrow, what it means when you say good death. It can be very diverse what the patient may say. Many say, most when I ask, when we do this, what we call it as, many places they are doing this, what we call it as death cafe. We sit down in groups and forums and discuss good death. And when I ask any gathering about what's your idea of good death, majority would say that if I die in my sleep without much prolongation in this whole process of dying, that is my idea of good death. Dying quietly, dying without pain, dying suddenly. This is a theme which comes back again and again. Why that is dying suddenly, die in sleep? Because the suffering, the prolonged way of dying is not acceptable to majority. Majority want it to be quick, painless and peaceful. But how? Otherwise what is happening in reality? Exactly opposite of this. This is I've taken from NHS UK. It's a nice guideline. National Institute of Clinical Health, a nice guideline, action for end-of-life care. There's a nice document around end-of-life care guideline which they're given. And they have a definition of good death. And they say that good death means being treated as an individual with dignity and respect, without pain and other symptoms, being in familiar surroundings, being in company of close family or friends. So none of this applies in our regular hospital. This is what they say is good death. And when you talk about providing good death to a patient, the 6 domains of care. Again, we talk about physical symptoms because suffering means the first thing which comes to mind is pain. Pain, dyspnea. So they give so much emphasis on the physical domain of care, managing physical symptoms, psychological and cognitive symptoms, economic and caregiving needs, social relationship and support, spiritual and existential beliefs, hopes and expectations. These are 6 domains of care. They it's defined as it came in one of the articles in Lancet. So coming back to a very practical part of care of the dying. So tomorrow, if you're going to talk about care of dying in your program, what is that the minimum we should be thinking about when you talk about care of the dying, especially when you're talking dying in a chronic progressive conditions. Acute death, you can't do much about it because they come with some road traffic accident, severe myocardial infarction. When you're dying, it's quick, nothing happens. But you're talking about any end stage progressive condition, whether you're talking about end stage renal disease, cardiac disease, cancer, neurological conditions like motor neuron disease, old age related conditions like dementia. These are all progressive conditions which leads to decline and end stage and they die. How do we help them with that condition? So when you talk about end of life care, what does it mean? It may mean different to many people. For many, it can be last 1 year of life. It can be months, weeks, or days, or hours of end of life, life phase. Very often, when the patient dies, it's a retrospective. Oh, I think he was dying, that's why he was having this problem. We make this diagnosis retrospective. So, end of life can be broad. The moment a patient is referred to palliative care, it can be end of life, or it can be really, really end of life care when the last few days or weeks, or it can be last day of the life, terminal care. Suppose today the patient is dying. There can be anything, spectrum. It's up to you how you define what your idea of end of life care. So how do we know that this patient has entered end of life? How do we know, okay, now this is a phase which means that he's nearing end of life? The different ways. The one thing one trigger, there are many triggers they talk about. One trigger which is world over accepted is what we call it a surprise question. Any patient with advanced or progressive life-limiting conditions, like I've given the examples, any patient with advanced progressive life-limiting conditions, ask this question. Would you be surprised if this patient were to die in next few days, weeks or months? Suppose you see a patient with dementia, advanced progressive dementia, and you expect that I will not be surprised if this patient now doesn't live for another 1 month. That means that he's got 1 month of his life. And this answer you'll get based on your own clinical judgment. And once you get that answer, it'll help you to shape or plan a care plan for that patient. If this patient has got only 1 month to live, what is that I want for this 1 month, this patient? This is how you make a care plan. There are other ways to look at other triggers to look for whether this patient is entering end of life care phase. This is what we call it as some general indicators, indicators for declining health, where you must realize, okay, this patient is entering the end of life care plan. What are these general indicators? Declining performance status. For example, the patient is in the bed or in chair for more than 50% of his awake time or his entire 24 hours. That is declining performance status. He's dependent on others for his activity of daily living. There you mean more and more is depending on others for his eating food, going to toilet, changing clothes. That means again, that is one more indicator. 2 or more unplanned hospital admissions in past 6 months. A dementia patient, for example, is going to the hospital again and again in last 6 months for some crisis. That means he's entering end of life care. Significant weight loss. It has to be significant in past 3 to 6 months. Then you know, okay, he's declining. He's entering end of life care. Persistent troublesome symptoms despite optimal treatment of underlying condition. Even when you're treating underlying condition, the patient is having persistent pain, persistent dyspnea. You know that, okay, something is not all right. Now he needs, I think, the total change in approach to how we are dealing with this patient. And if your patient straight away asks for palliative supportive care or treatment withdrawal, which means that he needs that total change in approach to how you're going to take care of him. There are some tools which we can use. Many centers, they prefer their own tools like Barthel Index, pulse screening assessment, like P, physical condition, upper limb function, lower limb function, sensory function, environment, Karnofsky's performance status, WHO performance status, or ECOG performance status. These are all different performance status which may help you to make a decision. There are some disease-specific indicators, like for cancer, you have breast cancer indications, for cervical cancer, patients with brain metastasis, there's disease-specific indicators. Similarly, for other chronic conditions, COPD, heart disease, renal disease, there are very clear guidelines about when is that patient is entering the phase where you talk about palliative care or end-of-life care. So there's no ambiguity. You cannot say, I don't know when to refer. If you're interested, if you're dealing with renal condition, look up what is the current guideline about when to refer to palliative care, when to think about end-of-life care. When you're actually dealing with a patient, any patient in your clinic, how do you know when the patient is dying? There are clear-cut signs and symptoms. You may be knowing this already, but once again, it's good to look at these aspects, because many times the family will ask, but when you need to speak to the family, you need to review the patient's condition every day. So when you look at these signs and symptoms, you can tell your family, the patient's family, hey, I think he's dying. When you see the increased period of weakness and tiredness, patient is withdrawn, unconscious, cooling of extremities, irregular heartbeat, stiffness caused by immobility, breathing pattern changes, difficulty in swallowing and pooling of saliva, all the signs and symptoms, yes, patient is dying. Family may ask you, how do you know that he's dying? I'm taking care of my father in my home. How will I know that he's about to die? Tell him, if you see these problems, this is how the usual dying phase looks like. They need to know because they won't have seen a death before. So it may be helpful for the family to know how a dying process looks like. The common symptoms which we see with dying: pain, agitation, and distress, cooling of saliva secretions because they can't even bring it out. We call it as sometimes rattle. Respiratory pooling, secretion of, and they have this typical rattling sound in the throat, breathlessness, nausea, and vomiting. These are the common symptoms. They say there are two roads to death. One road of death to death is the person losing consciousness and they die in their sleep. The second road to death is the patient becomes extremely agitated, probably because all the systems start shutting down and you have a lot of change, more dynamic changes happening, and lot of what you say, uremia and decreased urine output, liver stops failing, hypoxia to the brain. So all these things leads to a state of delirium in the patient and they become very agitated. So these are two roads to death. And they say the most common road to death is not patient losing consciousness. It's more what we see is patient become agitated. And also the management becomes very challenging when the patient is agitated. So all the more you need a lot of palliative care support. So when you're dealing with death and dying, helping your patient to deal with death and dying, first of all, recognize that he is dying. That is one step. Impassable assessment and management of symptom, psychological and spiritual needs. Patient and family may be emotionally upset. Spiritually, they may be having a lot of distress. So helping them managing symptoms and other dimensions of suffering. Appropriate and prompt management of symptoms. Again, I'm coming back to that again and again. Communication. Communicating with the patient and the family. He's dying. Do you have an advanced care plan for this patient based on patient's wishes, and then make a shared decision making and crisis plan? Suppose this patient aspirate. What are the things which may go wrong with this patient now? Suppose a patient with advanced dementia. What is that things can go wrong? He may aspirate. He may have a lot of breathing difficulty. So what to do? So having this kind of crisis plan in place is very helpful for the family so that they know how to deal with it. If you don't do that, again, the family will shift the patient to some hospital. Again, they'll panic and the patient again suffer traveling from one place to another place. There's no planning. They'll be rushed to a hospital. They'll be code blue. He'll be shifted to ICU. He'll be put on ventilator and patient dies on that. So this is the usual sequence, but if you plan it well with proper advanced care planning, proper crisis plan, you can avoid this kind of catastrophe. There's a nice position statement by Indian Society of Critical Care Medicine and Indian Association of Palliative Care together, because you cannot say that we don't have proper guidelines. You have a nice position statement around the care, end of life care policy. And they talk at length about, it's all about limiting inappropriate medical intervention and improve quality of care for the time. And the emphasis the position statement has given about honest communication with the patient and the family regarding prognosis, goal of care, and a shared decision making. So if you're not very sure, if you're in your hospital and your management is questioning you around these kind of decision making, please refer to this position statement. Also, the ICMR has recently come out with a very beautiful guideline about end of life care decision making. And if you are thinking that legally you are not protected, please remember that there's a nice recent Supreme Court 2018 Supreme Court has come out with very beautiful recommendation around death and dying. They talk about passive euthanasia, which is nothing but withholding and withdrawing life support, and it is permissible now in India. Euthanasia is not permissible. Euthanasia means mercy killing or killing the patient because patient asked for it because of the suffering. That is euthanasia. That is not legal in India, but the law supports you in terms of withholding life support, withdrawing life support, advanced care planning. So you are legally also now protected around these issues. So as a hospital administration or people who are dealing with death and dying, please learn little more around what is the position statement of Critical Care Society, Indian Association of Palliative Care, ICMR, and what is the Supreme, our law stating, saying in India. When you say advanced care planning, it means short-term and long-term goals of care and treatment, such as resuscitation plan, what to do in the event of acute or further deterioration, withholding or discontinuing certain aspect of care. This all comes under advanced care planning. But remember that the important aspect which will protect you always is proper documentation. It should, if you document it well and have a consensus within the care team, you are good, you are protected. And this whole advanced care planning also means having a medical proxy. Suppose the patient loses consciousness, or patient gets confused and he doesn't have the capacity to make decisions. Who will be the proxy when such event happens? That is also part of your advanced care planning. So continuing with the management of end-of-life care, as I said, impassable assessment, management of symptom, crisis plan, communication, shared decision-making about what kind of treatment, what is our goal of care, advanced care planning. These are all part of end-of-life care planning. There are some other things which we can do while you're doing all that. Assess the medications. A lot of time patients will be on a long list of medications, many of which are not relevant. So you may have to cut down on all that, make the prescription clean, discontinue inappropriate monitoring, which is not going to be helpful, which is not going to in any way guide patients' comfort, in unnecessary investigations, review the DNR status, and of course, very important, has the organ donation part been considered? Because if you don't do that while during the dying process, you will not be able to help the wish of the patient to donate organs. So these are all things which we must consider while planning end-of-life care. Like I said, a lot of these medications can be stopped when the patient is dying. No need to, it doesn't make any sense to continue antibiotics towards end-of-life care. Aspirin, statins, vitamin supplements, oral hypoglycemic medications, insulin, antidepressants, all of this doesn't make any sense towards end-of-life care. There'll be a lot of discussions and anxiety among family members around clinically assisted hydration and nutrition. You'll have this pressure, put some patient is not eating food. Why don't you put Ryle's tube, nasogastric tube and feed? Why don't you give some IV fluids? Because for them, patient is not eating as simple as that. So you have to do something. Several studies have shown that these kind of clinically assisted nutrition and hydration has no benefit in end-of-life care. So this decision has to be made with patient's best interest always, not guided by you have to do something. If the patient is thirsty, yes, you may correct hydration. Otherwise, no need. Because if you do these kind of things, it may cause more harm than doing good. Suppose you dying patient, you unnecessarily give fluids, it fills up the lungs and patient may be more dyspneic. And then finding line and then trying to do this. And just for that reason, you may have to hospitalize the patient. And by giving this kind of nutrition and hydration is no way going to prolong patient's life. You know that. There are enough studies to evidence to support that point. So you need to decide on that. Like I said, pain has to be managed. Even the patient is dying, don't stop medications, pain medicines. Till the last minute of his life, he needs proper pain medication based on his pain need. Like I said, anticipatory care or crisis plan. You must have a proper crisis plan made for the patient. If there's pain, what to do? If there's agitation, what to do? If there's a respiratory secretion, what to do? If there's nausea and vomiting, what to do? And breathlessness, what medicine? If you have a nice care plan, we manage many of these patients, even in the home. We create this care plan, leave these medicines in the home, and teach the caregiver or the nurse who's there in the home to administer these medicines. And many patients, they are comfortable and they die in the home without being shifted to the hospital. Of course, we had to think about some non-drug measures while doing all this: mouth care, pressure sores, positioning, care of the catheter, rectal evacuation, families, prayer. So all these are non-drug measures. When the death finally happens, it's important how you pronounce that. It has to be done in a professional, but in a compassionate manner. Because for the family, that's the last thing. They'll recollect. You know, when my father died, I remember how calm he was. He had this very calm expression on his face. He looked at me, held my hand, and then he died. So those few last moment of his father's life, that way family will remember for life. So the way you pronounce that, your words, tone of your voice, all these things are remembered by the family. So use clear language. John has died. Euphemism doesn't help. I'm sorry he's no more. I'm sorry for your loss. No. Say in clear language. They need to hear that. He's dead. So encourage to do that. Once you declare death, don't just leave the body there and go away. Half naked, secretions coming out, tubes all over the place. Imagine yourself. How do you want your dead body after your death to be treated? Treat the body with dignity, even after death. How do you clean the secretion, take away the tubes, cover the body, how you care the body? These are things which means a lot to the families, seeing their loved one being treated so with so much of dignity. Also for yourself, like imagine yourself how your body to be treated. Guide the patient and finally about the death certificate, what is the process involved, because they won't know these things. What is patients, treat the patient belonging with respect back to the family, mortuary support. Suppose they need help with guidance around where to find the freezer box, where is the cremation place, where to keep the body. They need a lot of guidance. So you maybe the one member of your care team can provide these kind of guidance. And finally, after the death, when the family is grieving, making that one bereavement support visit or a phone call, supporting them may be very helpful for such patients. So coming back to planning end of life care for our patient, 68 years, gentleman with advanced cancer lung. I would start with when the patient's lung condition is progressing, advanced cancer, progressive cancer. I will sit down with the patient and the family and define the goal of care. For this gentleman, it will be, suppose I say, my goal of care would be comfort care. From here onward, whatever I do, I'm going to ask this question: is that going to give comfort to the patient? Now this, and identify patient's preferences and advanced care planning. Once we recognize that, sit down with the family and the patient, communicate the prognosis and our goal of care, and make a shared decision making. So that when things suddenly goes wrong, suddenly there's a crisis, the family knows, okay, we already discussed this and this is what we're going to do. No surprises there. But family will be anxious if the patient is dyspneic or having pain. So make sure we are helping the family and the patient with dyspnea, pain management, whatever symptom they may be experiencing, and make a crisis plan for the patient. And end of life care planning. Where do you want the patient to be at the end of life? In the home or hospital? In the hospital, where? So having a nice end of life care planning will help the patient and the family. And helping after the death of the patient with supporting the grieving family with bereavement support. So this is what an ideal end-of-life care situation would look like. It is not that it is not doable. It is very much doable. And most progressive conditions, you have enough time to plan for all this. Death in a progressive advanced condition is not a surprise. We know that this is going, the patient may have very soon, patient is declining, he may die. If you make this care plan, it helps the patient and the family. This is a famous quote by our founder of our palliative care movement, Dame Cicely Saunders, as she says, how people die remains in the memory of those who live on. Thank you.